like to call the audit committee meeting together for the 19th of, what are we in, March? No, February. Gee, maybe we'd like to have it be March, so we're getting closer to spring, right? But it is still February, and I'd like to look at our agenda. Welcome everybody, first of all, in the audience, and also those watching on Channel 16, and however else we get it out to people at this time. First item of the agenda is approval of minutes of December 11th, 2014. Could I have a motion to accept those minutes? You've all gotten them? So moved. Okay, all right. And second?
Sure, second.
Mr. Karski? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Good, thank you. We have three things, or three audits to look at today. And if you would like to get started on them, Mr. Olson.
Yes, Rich Oaksel, the Internal Audit Manager. I did this audit in Mid-American Energy and Constellation New Energy. We did this audit primarily to look at the internal controls over the billings that we get from those two vendors, and also look to make sure those billings appear reasonable. We have two vendors that we use for the small accounts, like the warming house at the skating rinks, for example, or a small user. Those are billed through Mid-American. And for our larger accounts, we use Constellation New Energy. And the reason we do that is because we have an agreement with them that we entered into back in 2006. And the purpose of that agreement is to kind of smooth out the volatility of the natural gas prices. It makes sense to do it on the larger accounts because we do get a small charge that we have to use the infrastructure or the pipes that Mid-American supplies. The contract is to buy bulk amounts of natural gas, and we get, it's kind of a mixture of a fixed price, and then there's a spot or index price, so it gets a little complicated, but the idea is to smooth out the volatility and then make the budget forecasting a lot smoother for the city, and we've been doing that since, I said, since 2006. The current agreement has been in place since 2011, and we spend over, well, between $600,000 and $700,000 a year. And now with the event center coming online, we'll be spending even more because that's a very large building. As far as the internal controls, we looked at a sample of the billings from both of the vendors to make sure that they were billed according to either the PUC approved rate or the contract rate. Make sure they were mathematically correct, that we didn't have any sales tax being charged on those. We didn't have any issues with that. The billings were, the ones that we looked at were correct. We wanted to make sure that all city-owned buildings were being billed by one of the two vendors, and only city-owned buildings. So we reviewed all the buildings that we have, made sure that that was that every building had a bill from one of the two vendors. The exception was light department. I couldn't find a bill for that, so I had to call the light department and ask them why they didn't get a bill, and they said they get their heat for their building from steam, so they don't have a natural gas bill. So that was the one anomaly that we found there. And they also examined a sample of natural gas meters. Actually, you can see the meter number on the bill. I physically went to the location, made sure, looking at the meter, that was the same as the billing. So I think we have pretty good confidence that the bills that we're getting are for our buildings. That the billings are correct. And then we looked also at the trend. We looked at the overall trend to see if that seemed reasonable. The gas usage was highest in January and it was lowest in August, is what we would expect based on the weather. We looked at, make sure that the largest buildings were getting billed the most, and that was the case every time. For example, City Hall, the water purification, the water rec plant, the law enforcement center were the biggest users. And we looked at things like the skating rinks and the swimming pools to make sure that looked reasonable, that we weren't having natural gas charges in January for the swimming pools, or that the skating rinks didn't have natural gas usage in the summer, something that would be odd or curious or unusual, need to be investigated. We didn't find any anomalies there, so we didn't have any audit recommendations. It appeared that internal controls are in place and functioning properly. Natural gas billings appeared reasonable based upon the nature of the facility and the time of the year. And we wanted to thank the finance management team for their cooperation during this audit.
Any questions of Rich? Any comments from the audience? Then I would entertain a motion to accept this audit.
So moved.
So move there.
Second.
Second. We have a motion to approve the audit. Are there any other questions or anything anybody would have? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Rich. Next.
That'll be Kim Schroeder will be doing this whole presentation.
Great. I performed the audit of the Dakota Golf Management Agreement. And I do have to start off by saying the report that was uploaded to SIRE does have one amendment to page 4 in our recommendation, and I'll just go over
Pam,
that.
would you put your microphone a little bit closer up and a little closer?
Yep.
Just
How
pull
about
it.
that?
Okay. Yeah, pull it closer.
Right. As I was saying, the report that was uploaded to SIRE does have one amendment to the recommendation section. We just changed the last sentence, and I'll go over that during that section of my report. The Dakota Golf Management audit was a compliance audit. We have an agreement for them to manage the 3 municipal golf courses that the city owns. They've been providing management services for us for just going on probably 20 years. About 1995 is when they started doing that. And the management contract was set to expire December of 2015, and as you all know, it was extended through December of 2017 due to all the renovations going on out at Elmwood. The objectives of this audit were pretty straightforward, to determine if the city was in compliance with sections of the agreement relating to maintenance and oversight, and to determine if Dakota Golf Management was in compliance with all the various sections of the agreement. Our work consisted of doing staff interviews with both Dakota Golf Management and the City Finance and Parks and Recs Department, and review of various source documents, policies and procedures, and testing of internal controls that were performed by Dakota Golf's external auditor. We didn't duplicate that work. We were able to rely on what they had already performed. We also performed detailed testing to ensure compliance and did an analytical review of the reasonableness of revenue sharing for the previous 5 years. The results of the audit were good. We found that the city is providing oversight and maintenance as outlined in the agreement. When we interviewed Dakota Golf Management, they had no expressed concerns regarding that. Dakota Golf Management is performing regular upkeep of the courses through proper fertilization and watering. And it looks like, according to a survey conducted of local golfers, that they're meeting or exceeding expectations in most areas. We noted a few areas that were rated as poor or fair on the survey, and followed up with them to see that adequate steps were being taken to address those issues. Most of those included updates to clubhouses and other course facilities, as well as some food and beverage offerings. But it seems like they've appropriately taken action on those, and very timely. Our recalculation performed of the city's share of the revenue, which ends up being between $250,000 and $300,000 a year. Our recalculation was good. It came in within plus or minus 1% of the amount that they remitted, so we thought that was pretty strong. We also found that they were up to date and current on all required insurance policies and coverages, and that those policies all met the amounts specified in the contract, and that they were providing the city with all required monthly and yearly reporting. We did have one recommendation as a result of the audit, and that's where I said that we amended this slightly from what was uploaded. Due to the amendment to the management agreement, we changed the process of how the revenue sharing works. And those funds are now being retained in a management account that is held by Dakota Golf Management. So we recommended that City Finance Department or management document in writing policies and procedures that they're going to put in place to monitor the funds in that account. And additionally recommended that they request copies of that monthly bank statement and review those to ensure the expenditures are for the required purposes. Like I said, the report that was uploaded, we had originally discussed having that bank statement come directly to the city, but management felt like for practicality reasons, they would just get it in their reporting package. So that was why we changed the wording on that a little bit. But other than that, everything looked good. Like I said, the contract is set to expire 2017, and just want to thank everyone for being very accommodating, both Dakota Golf Management and staff here through our Finance and Parks and Rec Department.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes, sorry.
I just had one quick question on the revenue. I guess I'm not sure how it's calculated, but you just had a small variance there, but what drives any variance at all? What numbers are involved in that, or?
The way it worked for, not going forward, but in the past, it was I think it was 10% of the profits got remitted to the city. So we took, I'd have to look at my work paper again, but we just did a reasonableness recalculation based on their audited financial statements. So I guess there could be any, I'm trying to come up with a specific reason, and I can look at the work and get back to you, but yeah, we're talking a few $100s in variance.
Yeah,
It wasn't a lot.
It was low. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, why there would
Involved
be.
in the calculation that you would come up different. That's all I was wondering.
Okay. Yeah, and if you want, I can follow up with you on that. I just have to pull the work paper and take a look.
I think we got, whatever it was, 10, excuse me. I thought it was like 10% of most of the revenues. I think maybe the lessons were not included, but I think it was, like the green fees and the season passes, and then we get a percentage of that. But they do have external auditors audit their financials, so we're relying on a lot of their work for that.
Right. So it may have very well been an adjusting entry back to financials or something that threw that off. I don't recall.
Yeah.
We didn't look into it specifically, I guess, because the variance was so small, but
Right.
a variety of reasons.
And then, and as the report noted, in 2014, there wasn't really any revenue
Right.
coming in because of the reconstruction of Elmwood, so there wasn't any money coming to the city in 2014. So,
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Kim, I have one. On page number 3 and 4, under the scope of the services required, the survey that was done, you mentioned your last sentence there, management has taken appropriate action to improve areas identified by the survey as poor and fair. Can you identify what those areas are? Or you don't, do you have that
I can,
available?
like I said, most of them were due to inadequate clubhouse, which, they've built a new clubhouse at Prairie Green and moved that, because this was 2012, so the survey was conducted before that. And then a lot of the ratings for poor or fair that I can recall checking into were facilities on the course, such as drinking fountains, bathrooms, and a lot of it was food and beverage service or merchandise offerings.
Okay. Can you send that to me?
Yep.
Or to all of us, if you would, just what those fair and poor areas were, or do you have the survey available to you?
I do. I can send that to you.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the report, the audit?
So moved.
Got a first?
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Good. Thank you. Good job. And lastly,
yes, Jess performed this audit, and she'll be doing the summary, but I notice management is here from planning office, so if there's any questions, I'm sure they can be answered, so go ahead.
Planning and Building Services oversees the rental registration program. This program came into effect in 2003, and it requires any property owner that has a rental property to register that property. In discussions with management, when it originally came out in 2003, the purpose was that if that property owner had a code violation, whether it be snow or, tree removal, the branches, this was to be used as an easy way to contact that person before a citation was issued, so that all their information was on file, or their management company, if they lived out of town. Initially in 2003, the ordinance was a permit and registration process, and it required the property owner to complete a renewal application every 3 years. There was no cost to the property owner for the renewal or the application, the initial application. And then a change in the ordinance in 2011 removed that 3-year renewal requirement. But if the property owner changed, they were responsible to contact us to update that information. In 2012, Planning and Building Services started a verification process to find unregistered rental properties in the city. And this process entails getting a map from GIS and a property listing for all the properties in the neighborhood. And what the inspectors do is they look for properties that have the property owner name and information different than the person living there to try to identify potential rentals. At that point, then an initial letter is sent out to the properties to determine if it is a rental. If it's not a rental, they're asked just to contact us and let us know. And then building services keeps a list of what the outcome is of those contacts. So far, they have gone through Pettigrew, All Saints, Whittier, Cathedral and North End, Garfield, and West Sioux neighborhoods, and then the Augustana neighborhood was recently started. Two of the objectives that we had for this audit was to determine if management is administering the rental registration program in compliance with city ordinance, and then to determine if management is adequately detecting and registering all known rental properties. So when looking at program administration, like I said, the initial program was a permit and registration process. When those changes were passed in 2011, the 3-year renewal was taken out, but the wording remained permit and registration, even though they aren't getting an actual physical permit. So our first recommendation out of that is that Planning and Building Services should update the rental registration ordinance, application, and then all other applicable forms to match the current registration process, not the permit and registration process. And management did agree with this recommendation and expected the day of implementation to be the first quarter of this year. The other thing that we looked at was the verification process. One thing that we did note was that the process wasn't consistent in every neighborhood that they've looked at. When they verified one neighborhood, the initial letters and the follow-up letters were all sent out, but in a different neighborhood, some follow-up letters were not sent out. So in that neighborhood, there were a number of unregistered properties found that could potentially be rentals. I guess you don't know that until you get the contacts back, but our testing results are kind of inconclusive because the initial tracking sheets for the neighborhoods were not retained. So if a property owner did contact us and say, I got this letter, my property isn't a rental, that tracking sheet wasn't saved. And then it could be possible that some of those parcels aren't actually non-owner occupied properties. It could be an empty lot where a house was raised. It could be a garage, a parking lot. So our second recommendation then was that Planning and Building Services should establish a procedure that is used consistently for every neighborhood, that inspectors are verifying to ensure the highest possibility of finding those unregistered rentals and to assist in future verification in those neighborhoods. And Planning and Building Services has actually already implemented this and have created a written policy and procedure guide for that process that they've provided. So the program, the purpose of it is good. It's to quickly inform the property owner of code violations prior to issuing that citation. When a property is registered and all registration information is up to date, the program is effective. And we would just like to thank Planning and Building Services, management, and staff for all their cooperation and assistance during this audit. So, and like Rich said, they're here, so if you guys have any questions that they can answer as well. But.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's open it up to the comments if Kevin, if you want to.
Good afternoon, Kevin Smith with Planning and Building Services. I'd just like to thank Jess for all the effort she put into this. She did a lot of the back end work that we ended up using to create our formal policy. So we've offered her a position within Planning and Building Services, but she's staying where she's at. The process is very challenging because we have to rely on property information that we obtain from the county. So I'm not going to pitch supporting Senate Bill 100 today, but by creating a separate tax classification just for rental residential properties, that would make our lives a whole lot easier, because beginning with, as Jess pointed out, we look at wherever there's a property where the owner address is different than the property address. Well, it's a nice start, but arguably from what Jess found out, it's not perfect. And if there is a better way for us to have access to information of what is a rental property, what is a residential rental property, where we're not comparing multiple spreadsheets and things, I think it would go much more quickly. So that's not an endorsement, it's just something we think would be beneficial for this process. We have registered in Sioux Falls right now about 5,000 properties, which includes about 33,000 rental units. So since 2011, we've registered about 700 more through this process. And what we're finding is, what you might expect, is that beginning at the central part of the city and working our way out, we're finding a lot of single-family homes that were bought, converted into rentals, and were just never registered by the owner. So we're not missing 48-unit complexes. Everything that has been newly constructed since the ordinance took place gets registered when the certificate of occupancy is issued as part of the construction process. Those are all fine. It's the challenging ones where somebody bought a vacant, or a foreclosed home, converts it to a rental, and either doesn't know or doesn't want to register it. The value, and we have a really good relationship with the South Dakota Multi-Housing Association, where we've promised and we've made a commitment to rental owners. If you have it registered and we get a complaint about sidewalk snow removal, because it's a 48-hour turnaround on complaint to having our contractor show up, we will call you. And we've lived up to that commitment. So if you as a rental owner have a property where your tenant is supposed to be taking care of this and they don't, instead of having a $100 citation and another $100 assessment for the work that we have our contractor do, just register your property and we'll make sure you get a phone call. So there is a financial disincentive to not complying with something that doesn't cost you anything. And the Multi-Housing Association has been a great partner of ours in passing that message along to their members, and for anyone else who's considering getting in the rental business or is, just make sure your properties are registered. It is to your benefit to do that. We'll continue to go through our verification process, but I think as we get further out from the central part of Sioux Falls, we're going to have fewer and fewer rental properties, just because of the nature of the neighborhoods. But we did start with Pettigrew Heights a few years ago, and the process gets a little better every time, and part of that is because Jess helped us.
Questions? Kevin, yes.
Thank you both, Jess and Kevin. It's an arduous task. It's a big thing to manage, I know. And I understand how we get them on, but do we have a program where we take them off? Are we removing homes that are no longer rental properties? Do we have a way to manage that?
If there's ever a change, whether it's a change in ownership, if someone comes in to get a building permit, or even if it were a demolition permit, that's when we would make the modification within our system. But it begins with the property owner. Especially if you were to buy what was a former rental, single-family house had been converted, you want to convert it back, to let us know. But I think more important, Councilor Karski, is from a tax standpoint, what is your property being taxed as?
Yes.
Is it being taxed as this or that? So it's important to us in terms of code enforcement, but I think for the general public or for property owners out there, it's even more important. If you purchase property and you're converting it from one use to another, that the county knows about that as well.
If I could, I know we had a map that we could take a look at where all the rental properties are. Is that still, can you tell me what the website is or how I can get to that?
We're going to have that back up. We took it down
Okay.
while we went through our software integration, but I just talked to someone from GIS, and I think we'll have that back up very shortly. But
Okay.
it does have all the information, especially for our neighborhood champions, the neighborhood associations, because they want to know where the rentals are in their neighborhoods too. So we'll have that back up very shortly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Pretty sure.
Okay. Counselor Kashke, or Kylie.
Thanks for checking.
Yeah.
I would imagine a challenge is with the owner-occupied homes where maybe they've converted an upper level or a lower level into an efficiency apartment or something of that nature. Do you have many of those, and how do you make that determination when the owner is still there at the address?
Typically, if they're going to do some work, if they're going to do some plumbing work or some building work that requires obtaining a permit, that's when we'll find out, assuming they do come down to obtain that to actually do the work. They'll just be reminded, oh, if you're going to be renting half of this out, we just need you to register it while you're here. So other than reminding people then, it's pretty challenging. Sometimes we hear about it from neighborhood associations that they think this property has been, converted to a rental, and we'll start the search there. Otherwise, we just do it by blanketing neighborhoods, like with the verification process. But truly, for those property owners, it's in their best interest, and there's not a fee associated with this, but we've actually had people get cited for non-compliance, not getting it registered, and then they ultimately come into compliance just because they didn't want to. And thank goodness that's a very small number, but part of our responsibility is to continue the verification process, however challenging and laborious it gets to be.
Thank you.
I always remember back one of the first years I was on council where we did this in 2011, I guess, and somebody said something to the effect that if something happens serious in your one of your rentals, we want to know who we should get a hold of and what the phone number is. And unless we get this registered, we don't have that. A lot of times we don't have that information. We wait for the county courthouse to open up, et cetera, and go through it that way. This way we have it. We can let the property owner know what's going on with their property and keep things moving along smoothly if we can. Absolutely. We want to help property owners avoid receiving citations or assessments for work on their properties. And if you're a property owner who doesn't go by your rental property every day and you expect, well, my tenant is going to mow the lawn, make sure the garbage is picked up, make sure the sidewalks are shoveled, sure, that's a great expectation. But if they don't, I think you would want to be aware before we get to the point of issuing formal citations. And this is a great way to do that. One last question. Where is Senate Bill 100? I don't know. I haven't really tracked it that closely other than hearing about it through multi-housing. Okay. Good.
Right after 99.
A lot of help on this committee. Good help, though. Good help. Okay, I would entertain a motion to accept this audit.
So moved.
And
Second.
a second. Thank you. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Kevin. See, you brought the big kahunas or guns with you too, right? Yeah. Okay. I'll ask you now to take a look at the other sheet that you have available to you, asking for a special audit request for the Sioux Falls Transit, the City of Sioux Falls First Transit Management. This kind of came around because of the transit task force that's happened over the last little over a year and a half. I realize that the contract is going to be coming up in 2016. It does go for a renewal for a year, and then it can go one more year, at which point then we would have to renegotiate the contract. And I thought, with everything that's happening, this might be a good time to do the audit and make sure that things are in order before we possibly go to an RFP or to look at some other possibilities for that. So as you can see, we're going to review the internal controls over the financial operation, determine if transit bus service is scheduling efficiently and effectively, and look at the comparing it to some other transit systems throughout the country to make sure that we are that our bus system is run correctly and most to the most benefit of the city of Sioux Falls, to the consumers and the citizens of Sioux Falls. What we do need to do is, first of all, are there any questions? Does it make sense? Yes, Christine?
Is this paratransit and transit, or are they going to be two separate?
No, it'll be together, I believe.
It's one agreement, so
Yeah.
I would assume. It's one agreement, so I would assume we would do regular service and paratransit, so.
Good question, very good question. Yes, Counselor?
Maybe you mentioned it, but have we done an audit on them? When was the last one?
It's been a while, and we haven't specifically looked at these things in a while, so I think at least 4 years, if not more. But I know there's been some consultants hired, and they've done some analysis in the last maybe 2-3 years ago, so we'd look at those, obviously those reports, and see if there's been a change in the performance measures.
Yep.
That'd be one thing we can do, so.
Sure that things are implemented that were recommended,
Yeah.
different things like that.
See what the trend is in the last, say, 5 years of there's various performance measures that all transit systems have to track and report, I think, to the federal government, the FTA. So we can look at that information, so.
Mr. Cooper, did you want to say something about this?
Thank you. I'm Mike Cooper, Director of Planning and Building Services for the city, and our department is responsible for being the liaison with our transit provider. As Councilor Rothing mentioned, the City Council took on a major task last year. The task force process put a lot of time and effort into that, and I think it was a really good outcome. We started implementing some of the recommendations. We still have a few more to go. And then, as you mentioned, Rich, prior to that, we did have a consultant work with us on analyzing our transit routes, because we were looking at, is there a better way of scheduling or organizing those routes in terms of the hub and spoke and the efficiencies of the way that the current routes are structured. So there is a lot of that background information that's available. And then I think it was maybe 2 years ago that we transferred the financial responsibilities to First Transit. So I think that's an appropriate one to take a look at. But I just wanted to make sure that I understood what the intent was of that second objective when you're talking about the performance measures and making sure that the service is running as effectively as it can. And then even going back years before that, we've talked back and forth about whether it should be brought in-house or kept as a contract. So we'll be happy to work through with you. This is going to be a big undertaking, though, so
Okay.
we'll look forward to this one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your support. Questions?
Do you need a motion to
I think,
add this?
yeah, we need a motion to ask the audit committee to, or the auditors to do this special request.
I would move for that.
Okay, the second?
Second.
Second. Question? Councilor Kiley?
Yes, and again, I see that it has been extended for 2 one-year periods. So it expired in 2014, and it's been extended for 2 one-year periods, so, which means it potentially could end in 2015 if performance was not sufficient. So I would say that this audit would be completed in a timely fashion for that very reason.
I think Rich indicated that they probably sometime in the summer it could be completed
Yeah, that's what we would hope.
and
started-
reported back to
yeah.
us, yeah.
Because it would take some time to find a replacement service provider. We did elect to go that route.
Right. So, yeah, he understands the urgency. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Any open discussion? Any questions anybody has about what's going on and why?
Just a reminder, the next meeting is scheduled April 16th, which is a Thursday. Plan to have a representative from Eide Bailey to discuss the external audit, which should have been completed sometime in March. So,
Okay. If there are no other questions or anything, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all.